My kid blew a bubble the other day, a pink one. He held it there for a second, soft and round, before it popped. Sweet. Weightless. The kind of thing that's gone before you've even finished looking at it. He grinned and started building another one, and I stood there and couldn't quite enjoy it, because a few weeks ago I'd learned something, and now I can't seem to unlearn it. That soft pink nothing in his mouth came out of the black under the ground. I don't mean that as some kind of poetic flourish. I mean the actual black, the stuff we pump up from miles down, the stuff that runs cars. Somewhere along the way it became the thing he was chewing. I haven't been able to look at a bubble the same way. Since. It started the way these things usually start, with a small question I couldn't put back down. What is it exactly that lets a bubble do that? Not the sugar, not the flavor. Those are gone in about 90 seconds, and you know it. You can feel them go. I mean the other part. The part that stays, the part you keep chewing long after the sweetness has left. The part that can stretch out thin enough to hold a breath of air, and somehow not tear. What is that, actually? So I followed it. One thing. One thread. I wasn't trying to learn about the whole world. I just wanted to know what was sitting in my kid's mouth that could stretch like that and never dissolve. And the first thing I found surprised me because it was so gentle. That chew, the springy, won't quit, stretch and hold it quality. It used to come from a tree. There's a tree that grows in the rainforests of Central America. You cut into the bark and it bleeds a pale latex, slowly, the way a pine bleeds resin in the heat. People gathered it, boiled it down, and that was the gum. The chew came straight out of something that had been alive and standing in the sun. For a long stretch of history, the thing in your mouth had been close to a leaf, close to a root. A sap, collected by hand, barely changed at all. Some of it still carries a name you might half recognize. Chicle. It's a strange thing to hold in your head, that the stretchiest, most plasticky thing you ever chewed began as something a person bled out of a tree. And then, somewhere around the middle of the last century, it changed, quietly. No announcement, no headline. Two things happened at roughly the same time. The natural sap had got expensive and hard to come by. There was only so much tree, and only so much you could bleed from one before you had to leave it alone and let it recover. It didn't scale. A tree gives what a tree gives, at the pace a tree gives it. And meanwhile, almost next door, a whole industry had spent the war years learning how to make rubber out of oil. They'd needed it badly, for tires. A rubber that could stretch and take a beating and hold air under pressure without letting it leak, which is more or less a tire's entire reason to exist. When the war ended, all that chemistry, all those factories, went looking for other work. And it found its way, of all places, into gum. The chew got handed over. Modern gum base isn't one single substance. It's a quiet blend of a few, some for body, some for softness. But the part that does the real work, the part that lets it stretch and snap back and stretch again without falling apart, is a synthetic rubber, a petroleum-derived polymer. The same broad family of materials that lines the inside of a tire and keeps the air sitting exactly where it's meant to sit, which is precisely why it makes such a good bubble. The thing that lets a thin pink film hold a single breath without tearing is, more or less, the same thing that lets a tire hold its air for 1,000 miles down a motorway. And nobody really decided this, as far as I can tell. There was no meeting where someone stood up and announced that childhood was getting a new ingredient. It was simply cheaper and steadier and always the same. A factory can turn out a ton of the stuff that behaves identically from one batch to the next, where a forest only ever gives you whatever it happens to give. So the swap just drifted in, the way most swaps do, on the strength of being a little more convenient, and the tree quietly stepped back out of the picture. Now here's the part I want to be careful about. It isn't dangerous. The base is highly refined, it's inert, it's approved, it sits in your mouth, you chew it, the sugar and the flavor wash out of it within the minute, and the base itself passes straight through you afterwards, without your body taking in a single thing. Nobody's being poisoned. That genuinely isn't the story. The strange part was never that it might be harmful. The strange part was that knowing it was completely harmless didn't make the mismatch go away. Because the oil itself, that was the bit I really hadn't understood. I think I'd carried around a vague picture, the one a lot of us have somewhere at the back of the mind. Oil as old dinosaurs somehow, crushed down over the ages into a tank of fuel. That's not it. It's stranger and quieter than that. Go back hundreds of millions of years to oceans warm and crowded with life so small you'd never make out a single piece of it. Plankton, algae, the faint green haze that drifts near the surface and quietly feeds nearly everything else in the sea. There is an unimaginable amount of it, always, and it lives fast and dies fast. These tiny lives lived and died, the way everything does, and then sank. A slow, endless falling rain of the microscopic dead, drifting down through the water into the dark. And here's the thing I hadn't realized. Most of what dies in the sea doesn't last at all. It gets eaten, or it rots, broken back down and folded straight into the next round of living. That's the usual arrangement, and it's a tidy one. But in certain still, deep, quiet places, where the water barely moved, and there was almost no oxygen left down at the bottom, the usual arrangement didn't hold. There was nothing to eat it, and nothing to rot it properly. So instead of vanishing, it settled, and it stayed, and it got buried, under mud, under sand, under more of its own kind, under rock, layer on layer, year on year, until it was pressed down miles below the floor of the world. And then time did the rest. The whole weight of the earth above pressed steadily down. Heat rose up from far below, and the span of time was so long it's honestly hard to hold steady in your mind for more than a second or two. Slowly, slowly, the dead of those old oceans were cooked and squeezed and pressed into a dark, heavy liquid. That's what it is. Not made, exactly. More like brewed, over an age, out of a buried ocean that doesn't exist anymore. And it's finite. There is only ever so much of it precisely because it only ever happened that one rare, slow, almost lucky way. The right death, in the right still water, sealed off at the right depth, and then left completely alone for long enough. Burn a tank full and you don't get it back. Not in your lifetime, not in your kids, not on any clock a person could live by. So when my kid blows a bubble, that, improbably, is what's underneath the pink. Not really chemistry, when you follow it all the way down. The compressed dead of an ancient sea, briefly handed back to the daylight as something sweet. And those two things will not sit together in my head. They just won't. The bubble is about the lightest thing I can think of. Sweet, pink, there and gone, made this morning, meaning nothing in particular. And underneath it is one of the oldest, heaviest things I can think of. Something that took a whole ocean and an age, and the entire weight of the planet to make. And that is quietly running out. Bright nothing on top. Ancient, almost gone everything underneath. I keep trying to lay the one over the other and have them line up. They don't. There's a seam running between them, and I can't seem to smooth it flat. And once you've noticed the seam, you start catching it in other places. A flash of lipstick red moving through the street, that deep, even shine of a good color, and I'll lose a second to it. Because some of that shine comes from the same place. Petroleum-derived waxes, doing for a color what they do for a bubble. Not all lipsticks, of course, but some. Then it's gone, and I'm just standing there having been ambushed by a color. And it runs further out than that, if you let it. All of these things, the chew, the color, the small bright conveniences we don't think twice about, are tied to something much farther away than they look. There's a long, invisible line running out from the gum in a kid's mouth, through pipes and ships and refineries, all the way to a resource that's old and limited and gathered into a handful of places on the planet. We tend to think of our small lives as local, our own, close to hand. And most of the time they feel exactly like that. But a great deal of what's close to hand is quietly tethered to things that are neither close nor steady. Most of the time you forget the line is there, and then, every so often, you suddenly feel it, taut, quiet, impossible to ignore. There's a birthday coming up. There always is at this age. They seem to arrive about every 15 minutes. And at some point, I'll stand in a slightly darkened room and light the little candles on the cake, the cheap waxy ones that come stuck in a paper sleeve, and I'll know, the way I now can't help knowing, that the wax is paraffin, petroleum again. The same old black, refined pale and pressed into a stick the size of my finger. So the small flame I'm holding to it is, in a way, a very old fire. Something that lived in a sea hundreds of millions of years ago, died, and waited all that time in the dark. And now here it is, burning for about 90 seconds on top of a cake, for a kid who isn't even old enough to count the candles yet. I'll get them lit. He'll lean in and blow them out in one breath, the same way he blows a bubble, and everyone will clap and that'll be that. And the whole time, I'll be standing there with it not adding up. The bubble he blows, the candle I light, bright, sweet, brand new, here for a second. And underneath all of it, something ancient and finite, and very nearly spent. I still can't make it add up. Maybe some things just aren't meant to. Maybe noticing the seam is the whole of it.